Hey guys, welcome to the Liberal Hive Mind, a channel solely focused on exposing the abundant hypocrisy of the left. You know, this entire time since this whole Russia invading Ukraine thing started, I've tried to have an open mind. Most people tend to take a hardline stance, a lot of people seem to take an emotional hardline stance. The moment it happened, all of a sudden, overnight, everyone's a foreign policy expert. All of a sudden, regardless of what your stance is or regardless of what your opinion is, even if you're pushing for diplomatic peace talks and an end to conflict, you're somehow wrong or you're gonna offend someone. But really, when it comes to those people that I've offended in the past, those hardliners who say that the only option here is all-out war, fighting and taking down Putin, when it comes to those critics, their arguments or their stances tend to boil down to Ukraine good, Russia bad, therefore. War is justified because. Biden is right because. Which isn't an argument. I feel a certain way, therefore. And I'm saying this because of a certain Fox News clip that's currently going viral, where the biggest clown on Fox News since one William left, Geraldo Rivera, shows us the perfect example of why it's so hard to jump in the bandwagon with the rest of these warmongers. Let me show you guys that clip as well as some other stuff that I think is related. We got some stuff to get into, so let's roll the tape. Alright folks, so take a look at this. Fox Business host Charles Payne, a man who you do not want to mess with, I'll just leave it at that, the guy is an absolute hawk, turns Geraldo Rivera into a stumbling, bumbling, stuttering mess.
They hadn't gone off for 5 days. It was
100,000 people.
No, I'm saying air raid sirens hadn't gone off in that city in 5 days. It was phony baloney Hollywood junk. They didn't need that.
I absolutely disagree. I think that is a little partisan jab that you didn't have to make.
No, they didn't need the air raid sirens.
They have lost 100,000 people.
Russia was notified that Biden was coming. Do you think Russia was going to drop a bomb on President Biden?
No. Russia was not notified.
Biden was in no. Yes, they were. Come on, listen. Let me get back to the original point.
Some things you have to accept.
All right, let me just get back. I grew up in
Biden warned Russia. They told Russia we were going.
That's what I just said.
It's not
anyway,
true.
The air raid siren was the worst part of the whole thing. 160,000 U.S. families, American active military families right now have trouble in food insecurity. E1 to E4 are in big trouble, 29% of them. Here's the problem. Something is wrong. I grew up as an Army brat the first 12 years of my life. 23% of active households in the military with children are getting or have food insecurity right now. Of U.S. households, it's only less than 12%. You say, why can't we recruit people into the military? You know, when I was growing up, people went to the military because at least you knew you were going to get food, right? You knew you were going to get shelter. You knew you were going to get training. I mean, if those things are gone, why would you join?
Should Joe Biden allow the fighter jets to be used in this conflict, yes or no?
Probably yes. Joe Biden's presence in Ukraine should not be criticized.
I'd rather see the fighter jets.
Should not be criticized. He is the commander-in-chief of the armed forces of the United States. Yeah. His prime job, his first priority
should be
keeping us
Ohio.
Safe. That's not the way. That's not the way the country.
I got to take a break.
Now, Geraldo Rivera's arguments essentially boil down to Biden is right because he's the president. It seemed almost like towards the end he caught himself. He almost tried to make a constitutional argument.
That's not the way the country...
Now, I don't know if what he meant to say was that's not the way the country should be ran, but it sounded almost like he was about to invoke the Constitution, definitely an argument or a path that you do not want to go down in this case, considering the Pentagon seems to be waging an unconstitutional proxy war in Russia or in Ukraine. He also made the argument that the commander-in-chief, the commander of the military, Joe Biden, is doing what he has to do to keep us safe. Is he really? Because I'm pretty sure his most recent trip to Ukraine is making us less safe, as now Putin is pulling back from the last remaining nuclear arms control pact with the US that Russia had. Pentagon puppet Joe Biden has done nothing but inflame tensions, make things even worse, make things more unstable, essentially using the country of Ukraine and its people as expendable pawns in this globalist dick measuring contest. Excuse my language, but that's what it feels like. And Sean Hannity raised a good point that we've mentioned before. Why is Biden going to increase tensions in Ukraine and Russia with his ridiculous trip instead of handling the current domestic crisis on American soil? But even more egregious than that, what Charles Payne was going after Geraldo Rivera for in the first place was the clear publicity stunt that Volodymyr Zelensky and Joe Biden were pulling with this trip. You'll see headlines all over the place in all the leftist publications. Biden visits embattled Ukraine as air raid sirens sound. But as we later learned from CNN of all places, CNN reporter Alex Marquardt says no air sirens or explosions went off in Kyiv until Biden showed up.
I've been here for the past 5 days. I have not heard any explosions. I have not heard any air sirens until about half an hour ago, right when President Biden was in the center of Kyiv, as Clarissa was just mentioning.
And they didn't for the 5 days prior. All of a sudden, as Joe Biden shows up to Ukraine, the war theater propaganda begins. As if Russia would choose to attack on that particular day, and as if they'd be able to do that in the first place. As if the Pentagon would put Joe Biden in that kind of a vulnerable position without the proper intelligence and protections in place. We're even seeing reports that the American government warned Putin or told Putin in advance of the trip and that there was an agreement already. The whole thing just gets even more confusing. And again, it brings me back to my initial question, or the initial point that I was making in the intro. All these people who are just blindly supporting what's going on in Ukraine don't seem to have an argument. Oh, the whole military kabuki theater thing is just a coincidence. Biden's right. Should Biden have even gone there in the first place? What did he accomplish? Is he not just inflaming the issue and causing further division and further conflict in the region? No, Biden is right because he's keeping us safe because president and commander-in-chief and commander of the military. That's not an argument. Should we really be spending billions upon billions of dollars fighting an illegitimate proxy war for somebody else's border? Meanwhile, the southern border is experiencing an invasion. China and Mexico are shipping in deadly fentanyl by the metric ton, and over 100,000 Americans are dying every single year. Military families are struggling. Regular Americans are struggling. Food scarcity. An environmental crisis in Ohio. I mean, the list just goes on. Should we really be spending this much money fighting somebody else's conflict? Oh, well, Putin bad. All right, sure, maybe Putin bad. But why does it fall on the American taxpayer's shoulder? And what's the cost, and do the American people even support it? Of course, that doesn't matter, as Tucker Carlson pointed out on his show the other day.
But here's the interesting thing. Neither party in Washington cares what their voters think. Here, for example, is Republican Michael McCall. He is the Republican Party's head foreign policy genius in the House, a man completely controlled by the intel agencies. But here he is on television explaining that in a democracy, it doesn't matter what voters think.
And a new poll is showing support among Americans for arming Ukraine is dropping. How concerned, Congressman McCall, are foreign leaders you're speaking to that American support for Ukraine, particularly within your own party, is weakening?
I would say that support is still very strong, and this delegation, that's bipartisan, very strong support for Ukraine. I think where you're seeing a split from the administration, though, and I have to say that, Pamela, this is bipartisan as well, is that for the past year we've been very slow at getting these weapons in the name of it being too provocative, whether it be Stingers, Javelins, these short-range artillery, now longer-range artillery, ATACMS that can take out the Iranian drones in Crimea, and also aviation like F-16. If we put this stuff in from the very beginning of this conflict, a year from now may have been very different.
So you'll notice that whenever there's a bipartisan consensus on something in Washington, it's a bad idea. Usually it's the worst idea. There's no bipartisan consensus on saving middle-class America or rescuing rural Americans from fentanyl. There's no bipartisan consensus on that. Nobody cares. The bipartisan consensus is that we should send the contents of the U.S. Treasury to a corrupt Eastern European country to facilitate World War III.
Well, what American voters and what Republican voters want doesn't really matter because, hey, it's bipartisan support from the deep state goons in Washington and the military-industrial complex. Apparently your opinion doesn't matter. And apparently Congress doesn't even have to approve war anymore because the United States military machine has a new strategy, which is fighting illegitimate proxy wars, sacrificing other people's citizens rather than their own. And from that perspective, the war never has to end, now does it? Joe Biden recently went on the record saying that we're gonna keep going as long as it takes.
Freedom is priceless. It's worth fighting for as long as it takes, and that's how long we're going to be with you, Mr. President, for as long as it takes.
We'll do it.
As long as it takes, he says. A notorious deep state warmonger and Joe Biden's best friend, fake Republican-controlled opposition Lindsey Graham, certainly agrees.
I like the structural path we're on here. As long as we help Ukraine with the weapons they need and the economic support, they will fight to the last person.
He likes the path that we're on, fighting to the last person. You know, the sacrifice doesn't matter if you're sacrificing other people's citizens, other people's healthy young men. I don't know, the longer this thing goes on, the less and less convinced I am that we're doing the right thing here. All I'm seeing is a continued escalation of violence, a refusal to come to the table and negotiate for peace in good faith, a total unwillingness to understand and respect the Russian perspective, unwillingness to compromise and reach a middle ground to stop the mortality. I mean, tens of thousands, probably at this point, maybe even close to 100,000 or more, innocent civilians and young soldiers have perished on both sides of the conflict. And the idea that we should continue to fund this and keep going till the quote, last person, because Russia real bad, is ridiculous. I don't care if Vladimir Putin is wrong. From their perspective, NATO and the Ukrainian government is wrong. From the Western perspective, Vladimir Putin's wrong. Who cares? Find a compromise and stop the bloodshed. Of course, that's the exact opposite of what they want, because they're laundering billions upon billions of taxpayer dollars. Arms manufacturers are making an absolute killing, and I've yet to hear a single coherent argument as to why the bloodshed should continue. It's just a bunch of stuttering, stumbling fools pushing nonsense emotional rhetoric, and it's very easy for them to say that we should continue fighting while other people are sacrificing their lives, and they're sitting in their posh condos in New York City, drinking a $200 bottle of wine. I don't know, that's my perspective, of course. On videos like this, I love to read your guys' comments. I want to see who agrees with me, who disagrees with me. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section. And if you enjoyed the video, make sure to leave a like and possibly subscribe to the channel. Of course, you know we'd love to have you here at the Liberal Hive Mind community. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.